We have a two-part program tonight. The first part is talk a little bit about the calendar, and then we'll introduce our speaker and move on. I'm Cheryl Livingston. I'm the president of the Historical Society. Bill, would you like to come introduce our speaker?
Our speaker tonight is Keith Petrus. Keith is the advertising director at the Port Aransas South Jetty newspaper. He also publishes an obscure international magazine about geocaching and enjoys traveling all over the world in search of little boxes of junk. His travels have taken him to France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, the United Kingdom, and Spain. While in Spain with his wife Kathy, he watched the sunset on the Atlantic while standing on land that once was believed to be the westernmost point of the known world. Must have been beautiful. He says he is blessed to be living in this magical time and thankful to his ancestors, one of whom we're going to hear about tonight, whose grit, courage, and determination and sacrifice have made his life possible. So please help me welcome to the Aransas County Historical Society, Mr. Keith Petrus.
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate it. And thank all you hardy souls for coming out tonight on a less than ideal evening. I appreciate it. I hope I'm a little nervous, but once I get going, you can't shut me up. So, we had a setup here with my computer, my iPhone, and everything's going great so far. Let's keep our fingers crossed. I'd like to introduce you to the woman that Phil just referenced, my great-great-grandmother, Rosalie Hart-Priour. She was born in Ballymoney in Wexford County, Ireland in 1825. This woman was remarkable, not only because she and her family came to Texas during a time of great change, during the Texas Revolution, but also remarkable because she took the time to, in her later years, write about this. She actually penned her own autobiography, and it's just a wealth of information about that period of time in Texas. I'm going to let her own words tell the story, and then we're going to interject with a few things here and there as we go along. I'm not going to read these parts. I'm going to let you guys read this bit, and then I'm going to add a little additional information as we go along. So I'll pause every once in a while, let everybody catch up, and then continue on. Rosalie writes that her grandfather was the first man put to death for being a Catholic in the streets of Dublin in the rebellion of 1798. The executioner, after laying on so many strokes, would stop and ask, "Will you renounce the Romish Church and tell where the priests are hidden?" His answer was invariably, my dear grandmother remained by his side during the whole of that trying scene, with my father, then an infant 6 months old, in her arms, and my Aunt Brigitte, 3 years of age, by the hand. The executioner seemed heartless and resisted all her entreaties until the third day, when he gave her possession of my grandfather with permission to take him home and save him if she could. But it was too late. With all the care lavished on him, he died, another martyr for the Catholic religion. To this proposition, their mother could never consent. In this dilemma, she had recourse to Lord and Lady Hoath to keep the children from falling into the hands of their uncles. It became necessary for Lord Hoath to adopt them, as it was the only means by which the children could be raised in religion for which their father had suffered and died. When I read all this is just chapter 1 of her 50-chapter autobiography. And we've already got a public beating, martyrdom, and lords and ladies. It seemed very far-fetched to me. It's like, wow, this is just too much. Is she just building up her family history, or our family history? Is she kind of elaborating and trying to make us look like we're more important than we really are? I don't know. Where this Lord and Lady Hoth came from, there's no reference to how our family was connected to these people, to this almost royal family. So I had to just start looking for clues within the text of her autobiography for anything to corroborate all what she was saying here. So I started Hoth. Hoth Head is a real place. It's in Ireland. It's just east of Dublin, and it's a peninsula. And sure enough, there's a castle, Hoth Castle, and a pretty detailed history to go along with it. According to Rosalie, Lord Hoth gave Tom's widowed mother a home next to the church. Lord St. Lawrence and Tom attended school together, and upon learning Lord Hoth planned to send the both of them to college in England, Tom ran away. Joined a whaling vessel, was gone for 3 years. Came back, and Lord St. Lawrence arranged his commission into the Water Guard at Ballymena. The Water Guard is sort of like our Coast Guard. So, that's a lot of detail for something that seemed to me to be sort of almost like a made-up history. But I still have yet to find an actual connection, like a hard connection beyond her autobiography to this family and to this castle. But there were other clues in the text of her autobiography. It starts with this. She mentions that that her family came before somewhere in the mid-1700s and started a tan yard in Watling Street, Dublin. Now, a tan yard would be a place where they process skins to make into belts and leather goods and things like that. Watling Street, surely it's still there. So I did what everybody does in this day and age. I decided to check out Google Maps. And what do you know? There's Watling Street right there, and the Guinness Brewery is right next to it. I love beer. So, Watling Street, real place, and the Guinness Brewery now sits on this whole area that used to be this tanning district. But you know, better than Google satellite view is now you can go literally and walk the streets of Dublin using Google Street View. So that was my next step. And I went and I walked the streets of Dublin. I walked around the Guinness Brewery using Google Street View. And what do I find here? The Central Hide and Skin Company. Yes, even though this place closed in like 1985. So this area was still being used as a tannery type business, even in recent history. But you know what's better than Google Street View? Actual Street View. And I was telling Phil earlier, I had like a little twist happen between, I gave this presentation to the Corpus Christi, or the South Texas Genealogical Society a few months ago. And since that time, a few weeks later, my son surprised me with a surprise trip to Germany, which I parlayed into another side trip into Dublin, where I could come and look up some of the places where my family apparently had come from. So, here we are in Dublin. That's my son right there on the left. That's me on the right. And that would be short, I promise. Hoth Head, that island I was telling you, well, it's not an island, it's actually a peninsula. We're on top of Ben Hoth right here. That's myself and my wife, Kathy. And I'm not waving an American flag on top of a peninsula in Ireland. That's actually the little vest we were both wearing, because we were taking a tour of Hoth Head with these little electric bikes. Wonderful tour. We had so much fun. Our guide is Patrick there. That's my son and my wife there also. And if you were to take and spin around this photo 180 degrees, you can see Hoth Castle. As I'm there talking and the tour guide's talking to us, who appears at Hoth Castle but Lord St. Lawrence? Of course, it's to be his grandson, or great-grandson, I guess. But while we were there, the tour guide explained to us that this castle is just a residence. It's not a tourist destination, really. It's a place for these people. The St. Lawrence families lived there for 800 years or something. So they are in the process right now of turning it over to a private entity that's going to convert this castle into more of a tourist destination and create a museum and all sorts of other things along with it, a nice golf course. And it's kind of sad in a way because this man is carrying, you'll see he's carrying a painting there. And he's literally clearing out his childhood home and moving away. But it's a good thing in the larger scheme of things because they did not have money to upkeep this property the way it needed to be upkept. And so the new owners are going to convert it and make it a first-class destination and preserve it. It's not a bad thing. Yeah, I'm not sure how that got in there. That's another part of the trip. My son, we were going to, his reason for going to Germany was for Oktoberfest, and he insisted that we had to dress the part, and I just felt ridiculous. I have no German history that I'm aware of in my family, so this was just us playing dress up. But, it was fun. We had a nice time. Oh, thank you. And everybody says my son looks like Prince Harry. I try not to feed into that. He's got a big enough ego already. So, that was fun. Slides are over. Our vacation slides are over. But my research continued. I came home and I started looking at other ways of getting information about this family or her history. And Google Maps isn't the only tool we use. Now we have the internet. I started searching some of the trade records that existed, and there were a lot of them. And here's one I found with a heart associated with Watling Street. Richard Hart. Skinner at 22 Watling Street. At first I thought it was the age, the 22, but there's a guy 115 years old up above us. I don't think that could possibly be right. So it's 22 is the address, 22 Watling Street. And I kept looking, and this is 37 years later, right before the family immigrated to the United States. And there's a Patrick Hart, tanner, at 28 Watling Street, and R. Hart, which may be Richard, tallow chandler. Oh, no, that's not, I'm sorry, Owen Hart above him is a Skinner, also at Watling Street. So this Hart family had been operating this sort of business for many, many years in Dublin, and right in the area that Rosalie was talking about. This has to be Tom's cousins and brothers and uncles and nephews that are operating this business. Now, Tom was not a part of all this because he had converted to Catholicism, and we saw the result of that earlier. His family had basically disinherited him, so he didn't have anything to do with these businesses at this point. Later, I also found what I thought at first might have been the actual, Tom's actual father, but I don't believe this is right because I found a Patrick Hart who was a young man, and he suffered almost exactly the same fate as Tom's father. And the whole thing is on the internet, the trial of Patrick Hart for high treason. He was a member of a rebellious group called the Defenders. But you see that he died 2 years prior, or he was executed 2 years prior to what Rosalie said her grandfather was executed. So at first I was hopeful that this might be the actual record of his death, but I don't believe it's true. I think it's more likely that this was another member of the Hart family, because this person is actually, I read through the whole document, and he's actually connected to the Patrick Hart that was at the Watling Street location. It was two Patrick Harts, one was an uncle, one was a nephew. And this man was very young, so he couldn't have been my great-great-great-great-grandfather. Okay, let's see. So, kept on researching, and still haven't gotten to the end of all that. Still working on it. We're going to turn now to our hero, Tom, and his family in Balmona. So, after the whole thing with the Hove Castle and his growing up there, he was given a commission with the Water Guard, as I mentioned earlier, and ended up in Balmona, where he met his wife. The year was 1822, and when he moved there, and a year later he met Elizabeth Leary at the fair in Gorey, and 2 weeks after that they were married. They had a son, and a year later, who died, and then Rosalie Hart was born in 1825. And here we'll continue the story in her own words. Rosalie wrote, "It was one of the most picturesque situations that could be found anywhere, with the bay extending as far as the eye could see in one direction, and the farms with their fields of waving grain in the other. At a short distance from the castle was a spring. I remember going with Mother one day on a visit to a country gentleman's. I do not exactly remember his name, but I think it was Roche." This is Roche's Point Lighthouse in Cork County, Ireland. This is where he would eventually later be stationed. Probably should read this, it's very long. Tom was appointed to the lighthouse in Cork around 1828, so Rosalie, who was born in 1825, would have been just about 4 or 5 years old upon their arrival in Cork, and she would have written these words around 1885 at approximately the age of 60. Now, they stayed at this Cork lighthouse for a while, but at one point, and again, I'll give you Rosalie's words, one day it was uncovered that a great deal of smuggled goods would be landed that night on the coast during Father's watch, about 3 o'clock in the morning. Tracking the smugglers to a cave, he summoned them to surrender. As they seemed about to resist, he ordered his men to fire in the air. The one who seemed to be the leader cried out. Another case, I think, a little bit glorifying the family. All right, run away. Of course, when Rosalie's mother heard about this incident, it was very upsetting to her. She finally recovered, and when Father was ordered to the county Kent in England, she persuaded him to sell his commission and go to my grandfather's in County Wexford. My mother was the only girl in the family, and grandfather gave her 50 acres of land on which Father built a house. If he saw a beggar woman with little children, he would give her money. And although Mother was a very noble and generous disposition, she found it necessary to remonstrate. But his answer was always, I'm going too fast, let me know. When I gave this presentation the first time, I was reading every slide. So I'm going to try something different this time. James Power enters the picture. He represented Texas as one of the richest countries in the world and the most delightful climate. And his sales pitch must have been a good one because he taught many hundreds of families into embarking on this little trip to America. So many agreed to go, in fact, that now in Ballygarrett, there's a monument, several monuments to this whole Power Hewitson colony. This is the one that I discovered on Google Street View, and you probably can't read that, so there you go. Much better. actual street view, always better. Apparently they set this monument in 2001, and it's twinned with Refugio, Texas, of Valley Garrett. And if you travel to this little church back here, you will see this monument. And on the stones behind the monument, there are the names of all the settlers and people that went on this journey. And you'll see, if you were to go there, if I had time to show you, you would see names that are in this community right now and in this area. I'll read the text at the top. It says, from this parish of Valley Garrett in 1833, hundreds of people left to settle in Texas. They were led by a native son, James Power, an impresario of the Mexican government, which gave Power and his colleague James Hewitson of County Kilkenny authority to colonize Refugio, Texas. And there you can see some of the more prominent names listed. They endured long sea voyages, epidemics, hostile attacks, and war to establish a new home in Refugio. They played valiant roles in the building of the state of Texas. So, he's got his group of immigrants to travel. Now they have to make an ocean voyage. So Tom and several hundred other Irish folk prepared for their journey to America.
Was there something going on in Ireland that they were trying to escape?
Lots of religious persecution, just like everybody everywhere. Yeah, I would say there was famine that had occurred at the time. I don't know the exact reason. I don't think the famine was the reason that these folks went. Probably most likely what they consider to be persecution because of being Catholic. I think most of them were Catholic that came up.
The landowners used to rip the roofs off the family homes and things.
Terrible things. Terrible things. And reading some of the accounts of these defenders who were the rebellious group, some of the stuff they were doing was not real pretty either. It was a difficult time. Okay, so we started early in the spring of the year 1834. We remained in Liverpool for 2 weeks, visiting our relatives and seeing everything worth seeing. Okay, so now they're on their ocean voyage. It's going to take months for them to cross. The captain didn't want to go, or didn't know how to get to the Straits of Florida, so they circumnavigated around Cuba. And we're almost where they needed to be when we had an incident. The captain took a great fancy to him, and he would keep him and my sister Elizabeth with him on deck all day. When an order was to be given, he would take them and make them speak the order after it. As both children were too young to pronounce the words correctly, it caused a great deal of merriment, which I'm sure they needed on that voyage. One day, while on deck, Elizabeth was sunstruck, and after lingering 2 days in the most dreadful suffering, her spirit took its flight to join her angel sisters in heaven.
What is sunstruck?
Heat stroke. Basically, yeah. It was early in the year and it was hot. There were other things in this autobiography that they embarked on lighters, and lighters were like a light boat. There are lots of terminology you had to try to understand. The captain wanted to take her to New Orleans for interment, but we were becalmed, and the porpoises followed the vessel in such numbers, the sailors told him he would have to bury her at sea, or we would never arrive at port, so long as the corpse was on board. Can you imagine? A child, I mean, it's bad enough to give up a child and have to put her in the ground, but to put her in a sack and drop her over the edge of a boat, that's just got to be devastating.
And how old was she?
I don't know. Probably, I don't know, it's a good question, but very young. This is the part I always feel bad about reading, but this is the time they lived in, and it was true. None of us had ever seen a Negro before, and the children were nearly frightened to death. They were a great curiosity even to the grown people. So back then, they were coming from a land didn't have any Africans, so it was very strange for them. They also arrived and found something very different. We arrived at a time when the cholera was raging in New Orleans. People were dying so fast that it's impossible to dig graves, and the dead were buried in trenches. The captain of the steamer turned out to be his brother-in-law, Mr. Griffin. Mr. Griffin had some advice for Tom Hart. Tom should have taken this advice. So then they set off from New Orleans to Coconut, which was their destination where they had their leagues of land that they were promised to them. And despite the warning, Tom and family departed. So it's been an exciting scene. When we were safely across the bar, Colonel Power went into the cabin, and the captain, seeing no one was watching him, turned the vessel around and wrecked her just inside the bar. As people died, Tom assisted in the burial of the dead, taking them out to they were on San Jose at this time, and they were burying these folks on the island. Unfortunately, after assisting the ill, he became ill himself. And he was carried in a blanket to one of the lighters and taken to the landing in Coconut. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about Coconut, because it's an interesting place. And I love these old maps. This is Coconut right here. This would be Mission Bay up here, and this is the point where Coconut is located. This is a more modern map to give you a better idea. The little flag there is where El Coconut was located. And again, an old map. I love these old maps. Refer to the Furio Bay there. Pretty sure that's now Mission Bay. And you can see Coconut there. Yeah, that where it zooms. So there's the Coconut village again. And back at that time, I always thought of Coconut being like a completely deserted place. It might have had a tent there with some customs officials, and that was it. But it actually had quite a bit going for it. There were, even today, you can still see the remains of the Shell Creek ruins of these buildings that they put at this port. And there's this list just has all sorts of things. There's houses. James Power himself had a house there temporarily. Farther up the coast, on the satellite view, you can still see under the water the foundation of Mr. Plummer's house. And what's happened is, over time, the nature has consumed this coastline, and all these things are being pushed into the bay, and they're slowly disappearing. And if you look at this today, you'll see something very much like that. And these are the old crumbling walls of the Shell Creek buildings that were there at the time. And this is what I pictured it to be like back then, but that's not the case at all. They were row houses and all built from this material called Shell Creek.
There weren't that many trees though, were there?
Precisely. They had oak, but it wasn't exactly a great wood for building a house, you know. So they used the materials they had at hand, which were oyster shells, and created their own concrete. And I'm sure most of you in Rockport know about this, because one of your parks actually has a great shellcrete structure there, like a bench. I don't remember which one it was, but I was real interested to see that because it was a modern day version of what I've only seen crumbling in some of the local historical sites.
What kind of roofs did they have? Was it reeds?
I don't know. It sounds reasonable. I don't know. I'm not sure what they were using. Okay, early Spanish and Mexican residents of the region employed the technique of converting oyster shells into lime and aggregate to make a distinct and durable building material that proves superior to adobe in a humid environment. And now we return to our heroes. May 1834, Coconut Beach. It was a brutally hot day, and Tom had taken ill and transported to the island. He had not gone far when he begged to return, as he felt too weak to go any farther. It would be his first and last steps upon the land he had hoped to call home. We were in a strange country, thousands of miles from our friends and relations, on a sand beach exposed to the burning heat of summer, or drenched by rain through the day, and at night surrounded by wild animals, not knowing the minute we would be drowned. Then there were thousands of naked savages, even more to be dreaded than the wild beasts, in a company of Mexican soldiers, on guard for the purpose of preventing us from moving from that place under 2 weeks' time, for fear we would spread the cholera. It's not the end. Imagine traveling to a foreign country and losing the person who took you there. And this woman and her 2 daughters left here. There's a daughter that I haven't even mentioned yet that's still in the picture. Stranded in a foreign country, and they're on their own now. Even the land grant they were promised wasn't no longer valid because the husband had died. So she had to fight from that point forward to get the land that she had been promised to begin with. Life goes on. She marries John James a few years later, and he is promptly captured by the Mexican army, and he is killed with famine in his Manitoba. And a note here, she mentions Laverty often in her autobiography, and I didn't know what Laverty, what is that? It's actually her interpretation of La Bahia. They were involved in a runaway scrape, went to New Orleans, then to Mobile, Alabama. The runaway scrape was when everybody was fleeing the Mexican army during the Revolution. And it wasn't until 1839 that Elizabeth returned to Texas. Rosalie stays in Alabama for an extended period of time and ends up marrying a French gardener named Jean-Marie Priour. The Priour family is still prominent in this area in Corpus Christi and South Texas. 1848, she opens a general store over on Water and Schatzel Street, and that would have been right on the water at the time. The Water Street used to actually be on the water. And then later, Rosalie finally returns to Texas and assists her mother in her business. During the Civil War, Rosalie was the only teacher at the Corpus Christi Academy. And they made a life here in Texas after all this. So, in 1863, Rosalie's mother, Elizabeth, finally died and was buried at the old family ranch on the Aransas River in Papalote. And Rosalie herself passed 40 years later on August 23rd, 1903. And now I've got a final note from Rosalie's granddaughter, Annabelle Priour Teeley, who writes, I thought this was really strange. And so this is Annabelle speaking, and so they all went down into her grave, and there was nothing left but some hair and one button. And then Grandma was buried down in that grave. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Keith, did she get the land though that she was promised this year?
I have a letter from, I believe it's the governor of Texas, Neil, I can't remember his name, Benjamin Neal maybe, where she eventually did get land. In fact, it's part of my family, lore that we owned a large chunk of Corpus Christi at one time, but it was a chunk down there right on Crosstown Expressway. So I don't know that it ever really was worth much, but maybe we could sell it to the state for that freeway. We'd make some money off of that. But it got sold off over time. If you look at the old maps, you'll still see the Priour name on some of the old maps. But yeah, she did eventually get land, and she actually made quite a life for herself. One of the things I left out of this story, she was traveling to Mobile, and the steamer she was on sank with like $25,000 in her savings on it. Imagine how much that was back in the 1800s. It's just, it was an incredible story. I wanted to mention, I've taken her autobiography, which used to be only available in the Corpus Christi Library. You couldn't take it from the library and go read it there. And I've taken it and I've digitized the whole thing. And I will send it to someone here who can send you the rest of it. And you can read her whole story. I've just picked out little pieces here and there, and it is just fascinating reading. There's some things in there that are, we call them urban legends now. She talks about her father finding men pickled in wine and bourbon barrels, and like for some kind of medical cadaver trade or something. And that we think could be just her remembering stories from her childhood that she kind of incorporated. Because she was in her 60s when she did this, and she was very little when she was hearing these stories. So sometimes you take things too literally, or you might confound these things with your own family's history. Another story was about a wealthy woman whose child had died, and she tried to kidnap her sister. We think that's probably something she's remembering from a story she heard in her childhood. But if you look through this thing, most of the information is her first-person account of this time in Texas, and it's just amazing. From the Texas Revolution all the way through the Civil War, and then even beyond that. It's really interesting reading, and I'll share it with you guys. All right, any other questions?
Well, do you know that they did put bodies in casks of wine and things?
Exactly.
Lord Nelson, when he was killed at Trafalgar, they put his body in a wooden barrel with...
Well, normally when you hear that story, it's because the sailors have tapped into a barrel of rum. And they've drunken all the rum, and then they're like, but it's still heavy. But it's all based on fact, and that's how these legends become. It was fact. There was a human cadaver trade. I'm pretty sure people were actually murdered and then sold to medical colleges in London for medical research. So all these things happen. They may not have happened directly to my ancestor. Maybe they did. I guess the story had to start somewhere. Okay? Guys, thank you so much for coming.